Okay, well, welcome everyone. I'm just going to go ahead and get started. We have a short hour this morning, and I want to be able that Lindsey will have time to answer all your questions. So welcome everyone to an AirTAP sponsored webinar. My name is Catherine Stanley, and I am the program coordinator for AirTAP. So before we get started, I wanted just to go over a little bit about who AirTAP is, if you don't know us. So AirTAP is sponsored by MnDOT's Office of Aeronautics and administered by the Airport Technical Assistance Program. That's what AirTAP stands for. We are located at the Center for Transportation Studies at the University of Minnesota. And we also collaborate with MnDOT Aeronautics and the Minnesota Council of Airports to provide education, training, expertise to the aviation community. So AirTAP began in 2000. It was the first of its kind in the nation, offering practical yet specialized training and resources across the state for those who operate, maintain, and administer Minnesota's public use airports. Minnesota's general aviation personnel across the state have had access to targeted information and training to reduce costs and improve the safety, quality, and the overall efficiency of airport operations. AirTAP also helps airports build a community network for exchanging best practices and learning from one another. So AirTAP provides several things. We have four major areas. We provide education and training. We do a lot of annual events like the airport conference and technical workshops like the one today. We also provide technical assistance, access to experts, and we have a variety of resources and printed materials, including our quarterly briefings publication. So today, this is part of our winter webinar series. So today we're talking about incorporating BIL into your CIP. On October 20th, Lindsey and her crew will be back to talk about understanding the consultant selection process. And we're still working with MnDOT on identifying topics and dates for some upcoming MnDOT specific webinars through the rest of the year and into early 23. All of these sessions are recorded and are available on our website. And if you are new to Zoom or not as familiar with this platform, along the bottom is a black ribbon. On the left-hand side, you have the mute. Feel free to unmute yourself if you want to have more of a dialogue with Lindsey. Otherwise, please keep it muted. You could also show your face if we're not sharing a screen. Otherwise, you can't see each other anyways. But feel free to show your video. Completely optional. We encourage you to submit questions into the chat box. This way we can answer them in real time. And the nice thing is these are captured and we're able to save them and reference them later. You don't need to do share screen. It is active for everyone though. This session is being recorded and feel free to use the reaction icon. So that's all I have. And so now I'm going to be handing over to Lindsey. There we go.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining. Catherine, I appreciate the opportunity to host this, and thank you so much for organizing it, taking all the registrations. She sent me a roster earlier in the week, and I'm surprised to see so many names I recognize, but also so many that I don't. So it's lovely to meet you all that I don't have a working relationship with yet, and hopefully to build one. So I'm Lindsey Butler-Terry. I'm the manager of the Dakota-Minnesota Airport District Office. Our three states are Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota. I recognize that a lot of the people and participants are solely from Minnesota, so I'm going to try and stay a little bit with all three states, but there are some Minnesota specific things. I apologize in advance. My son brought home some lovely daycare crud. So of course, this morning I wake up and I have a froggy voice and a scratchy throat, thanks to my almost 3-year-old and daycare. So I'll be taking some pauses and drinking water. Of course, it happens on the day that I have to give a presentation. So thank you all for joining. Really appreciate it. So for the agenda, we're just going to go through a couple of some items that you guys all asked for. I'm happy to provide information that is actually requested and interested in. So the agenda today, we're just going to touch on a little bit of FY 2022 FAA funding. The meat of the presentation will be about the bipartisan infrastructure law, our new very best friend bill. We're going to be talking about the BIL ATP competitive projects, the proration program guidance letter, which some of you may or may not know even exists, and just some things to be ready for FY23 project readiness. Questions always can be at the end, but if you have one that you're thinking about, because we are jumping different topics, please feel free to either enter them in the chat or go ahead and, as Catherine said, take yourself off of mute and just ask. Doesn't bother me to interrupt at all. So for FAA money, in FY 2022, we actually had a significant number of grant programs, as some of you are aware. Obviously, our bread and butter is still the Airport Improvement Program grants. That is what our legislation is mostly famous for, and what we're all really used to is AIP. So I don't want to leave AIP in the dust by talking about our new best friend bill, but there are definitely a lot of funding pots available. Our supplemental appropriations, which was actually in our authorization language, not our appropriation language, goes through FY 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22, and we will have a supplemental appropriation for 2023 if authorized. As all of you are familiar with the COVID relief grants, we had 3 of them: the CARES Act, CIRSA, and ARPA. All of those grants are now under grant and obligated, and you all are working on drawing down the funds that were available for that. And then our new bipartisan infrastructure law, which I guess is almost a year old now. The legislation was enacted in 2021, but that has a few programs underneath it, AIG and ATP. So we'll be focusing mostly on that today. I would be remiss in not talking about all of our accomplishments. Grants at a glance is really something that I really want to tout my team for all of the things that we've accomplished in FY 2022. We issued the most grants that we've ever issued in a fiscal year when you add up the AIP grants and the bipartisan infrastructure law grants. The ARPA grants went to each and every one of the airports that requested the funding. For our states, that was 209 airports totaling $237 million. AIP and BIL, as you can see, we started with some infrastructure bipartisan grants. We did 37 of them this year in all 3 states. And then yet to be awarded are the ATP grants that were announced in July of this year. We were fortunate enough to have 6 airports selected in our 3 states for the first round of ATP. So the bipartisan infrastructure law, I know some of you have seen this slide before, is really broken into 3 parts. I strongly encourage you to bookmark that website, faa.gov/bill. That will get you to all the latest and greatest information. The bill money is broken into 3 parts. $5 billion for airport terminals. That is the ATP funding. $15 billion is the airport infrastructure bill money. That is your allocated annual money that is out of the infrastructure bill. And then $5 billion of air traffic facilities money. The top 2 rows, $5 billion for airport terminals and $15 billion for airport infrastructure, are being administered by the FAA Office of Airports, or ADO, our office. The bottom $5 billion is actually being administered by the Air Traffic Organization, and they're really focusing on aged FAA terminals and aged FAA equipment. So if you have any of those, that's where that money is being filtered. It is not being filtered through through our office. So under this law, over the next 5 years, our 3 states stand to collect over $472 million with the infrastructure bill as allocated and awarded. Now that does not include any of the airport terminal, that $5 billion competitive funds. So it could drastically increase. Obviously, we knew that 6 airports were awarded that for this year. So we're really excited about how that number is going to grow into the future. So how are these 3 programs broken into eligibility and percentages and what the money is? So your Airport Improvement Program grant formula is basically the money that is allocated in addition to your non-primary entitlements every year. So you get your non-primary entitlement or your primary entitlement each year, and then you're additionally allocated the Airport Improvement Grant Program formula. So those follow regular AIP and regular AIP eligibility and shares. The AIG Federal Contract Tower program, which is what the next line down, talks about $20 million annually, and that is solely for federal contract towers. Those grants, you have to be accepted into the federal contract tower program, and they are matched at 100%. As you can see, it's only $20 million annually, so it's not a whole bunch of money, but 100% is 100% if you have a federal contract tower. The second or the last column that talks about towers is the Airport Terminal and Tower Program. That is approximately $1 billion. This is the competitive grants program that I've briefed on before in other locations. This is our application period, and when you apply, then it goes into a group of other applications, and I'll go through that, how those were decided in 2022 in a little bit. But for large and medium hubs, it's an 80% cost share, and for small hub, non-hub, and GA airports or non-primary airports, it's a 95% match. So sticking with the airport allocations, your GA annual airport allocations are based on your NIPIAS airport asset category. That is based on a number of factors, including based aircraft, which is probably the primary focus. So when we are out kind of bugging you from our planners saying, hey, please, please, please make sure you keep your airport basedaircraft.com registration up to date. It is because that information is being pulled in each NIPIAS update to make sure that we can validate your basic asset category. So the allocations for the GAs are, if you're unclassified, unfortunately, you receive $0 under the BIL law. Basic is 110,000, local is 159,000, and regional is 295,000. There is a national category that is 765,000 as well. We just don't have we don't have a lot of those in our ADO. So in Minnesota, this is how it breaks out. The primary airports allocation represents about $43 million annually. National is about 2.29 million annually, 2.6 regional. The local represents the majority of the GA airports, which is 8.1 million annually, and 2.5 is for the basic. Those match requirements are important. They are 90%, and in the state of Minnesota, unfortunately, there is no matching local share for the BIL allocated funds. So for FY 2023, the allocations are not yet published, but we have a sneak peek to let you know that the primary airport allocations are coming. Stay tuned. They are based on your annual employments, operations, and any cargo that you may have. Changes to the GA BIL categories. As I said, the updated NIPIAS report is also coming soon. We have some airports that are moving to a higher role in all 3 states, and some that are moving to a lower role. You should already know this. I believe most of the airports that are on this list, we've already either notified or have had a CIP meeting to let you know what your new asset category and new BIL allocation funding is for. So this is where I'm going to spend a whole bunch of time talking about the period of availability for the FAA to obligate your bill allocated funds. This is super important. So while this money has an allocation life of 5 years, we're going to be giving you 5 years of this money, 22, 23, 24, 25, and 26. It still only has a 4-year period of performance. And by that means it has to be under grant or obligated within that 4-year time frame. So in FY 2022, which we issued 37 grants out of our 206 airports that we have available to accept those grants, a lot of people didn't really have their arms around what BIL meant and what the money was going to be used for. So not a lot of grants were issued. Basically 1/7 of our airports took a grant. So that 2022 money rolls over. You didn't have to do anything because it's a 5-year allocation, but it has to be under grant by 2025, not the full allotment of time. So make sure that if you're planning for a project, that you think about the expiration of the timing. And I'll go through a couple of scenarios later on in the program. I just wanted to let you guys know that this table in the frequently asked questions, which is question number 9, which is on the FAA website, faa.gov/bill, is incredibly important to not lose money that is allocated to you. Now, when the last column on this table says any unobligated funds must be obligated or under grant as in a competitive. So what happens is most of that money, if not used by 2025, will go back into a pot of money that will be competitive. It'll be competitive for kind of a different way of implementing projects, reducing airport emissions, reducing noise, overall impacts to helping the surrounding communities, electrical grid, and general benefits to what the surrounding communities are for the airport. So it's a little bit of a different way the legislation is written for those reallocated competitive funds that are not spent. That is also covered in the frequently asked questions if you have more questions about what happens to the unobligated funds. It's in question, I believe, F here, question F3. So are BIL funds multi-year funds? Just a little definition of multi-year. With the Airport Improvement Program grant funds, we have the ability, when we have a reauthorization that covers more than one fiscal year, we have the ability to multi-year grants. That means you can borrow in advance of your allocated money. It is similar to what BIL funds do. So while they are not necessarily guaranteed money, because we can't write obligated funds for years that we don't have the money for yet, usually AIP, because it's under a reauthorization, there is little to no risk. And the same thing is with BIL, because the bipartisan infrastructure law covers the 5-year allocations, and therefore we don't have to wait for a congressional allocation. We just have to wait for the calendar to change. So in 7 days from today, our fiscal year ends and October 1st happens, and we will then have a new calendar and a new allocated amount of money under the bipartisan infrastructure law. So if you are planning to do a larger project, AKA a hangar, or something that you want to build and you have the demand now, the opportunity for you to cash flow it at your own risk with, and I use the word risk very loosely because of the 5-year appropriation, there is that opportunity. So you can actually front yourself the money, and then the FAA would reimburse you whenever the money became available. So both of these two questions really talk about that in the frequently asked questions. It's not necessarily future money. It is just solely you have the ability to kind of phase it or save up in order to use it. I'm going to give you two scenarios to help capitalize on the best way to spend your money. And I use the basic 110,000 annual allocation as an example, just because it's simple, easy money. And additionally, this scenario is probably for a hanger, maybe a small box hanger or a couple of unit T hanger. So keeping in mind that the FY 2022 money, most people didn't spend. They didn't take a BIL grant this year, which is no big deal. Just didn't happen. So that money is already carried over for you and ready and able for FY 2023. So in scenario one, you would have to use your FY 2022 money by 2025. Thinking that you could do maybe a design for the first portion of your hanger at the $110,000 grant amount. And then in FY 2026, you would have 23, 24, 25, and 26. So you'd have all 4 years of that money available. So your construction grant would be for $440,000 or whatever you didn't use for your design money. So that's scenario one. Now, if you had needs as of today, which I know most of you do, most of you have a large hanger waiting list, and summer is sadly sort of over, and we're getting into the time of year when people want to put their airplanes in a hangar. You're going to have the increased need and the increased request for hangers. So think about in a cash flow situation, if you took your design money from 2022 and 2023, you would have $220,000 available to design and do one portion of your construction. Then in 2024, you would have another $110,000 available. 2025, another 110, and 2026, the same thing. How we would write the grant, I'll get into a little bit later about a proration, but how we would write the grant is based on a percentage of the building, not, hey, we're going to build you a roof, we're going to build you one wall, we're going to build you another wall. It's based on a percentage. So when you would have 3 additional grant years, we would do the total project cost and see how much of a percentage that $110,000 would cover for the total project cost. I'm going to pause there because that's a lot to think about. I will ask for any questions if anybody has any. If no questions, I'll just move on. But these are the two scenarios, and there's obviously many more that can factor into it. It is just the way in which you could, you can move the design and construction down as far as you want. 2026 is the last year that 2023 money is available, if you remember that table. So that's why it capitalizes on all 4 years available of funding. And if you would carry it forward, you'd have to then spend your 2023 money in 2026. So there's a lot of moving parts for the timing of which you want to carry forward this money and utilize it. So I only put 2 easy scenarios on here for you guys just to think about, but there's probably, I don't even know, a number of them that could just continue forward. So the most important thing, I think, and thank you to the consultants that I stole your screenshots of your CIPs from recent meetings that we've had. I've tried to keep them kind of anonymous and try and blur them out. They're blurred out intentionally. But it just shows that there are different ways to show your BIL projects on your CIP, taking into account those timing factors and when the funds are available and when they need to be obligated by. So it's really important to have a conversation with your program manager in my office, with your planner, with me. We can schedule CIPs, or if you just say, hey, I just want to have a BIL focused conversation about my airport and what we want to do, Absolutely. We're happy to have those conversations and happy to kind of help you unpack it because it's a little bit complicated. It still is for us too. We're definitely learning as we go, and partnership throughout the process is really important. I don't want to have money expiring. I don't want to get to 2025 and have to start, bugging people. Hey, you haven't spent your 2022 bill money. Let's talk about it. Let's figure out a plan. So let's work together and put some CIPs together. How you show it on your CIP as a running balance, as a separate column, or as just kind of all together. That's up to you. That's up to what your client or the airport or your consultant puts together for you, but really making sure it's all on one page so that we can kind of I use the illustration of patchwork quilt our federal funding together to make what's the best opportunity to support your project. So what's unique about the BIL allocated funds that is a little bit different than others is we don't have a need for an annual appropriation. So as I mentioned earlier, we're coming up on the end of our federal fiscal year. That means unless Congress takes action to give us a budget, which is hilarious because in my 21 years, we've never had a budget in October. We will probably be under a continuing resolution for AIP money, but for BIL money, there is no need for an annual appropriation. We already have it. We just have to wait for the calendar to turn in order to have a new fiscal year and a new wave of money available. Another unique thing is PFCs can be used to match BIL. This is important because the state of Minnesota doesn't have the legislative authority right now to match any BIL funds. So if you're a primary airport and you have PFCs and you're looking to do a BIL project, you might want to amend or submit a new PFC application because it must be an approved PFC application, but it can be used to match your BIL funds. BIL allocations can't be transferred between airports. So another thing to be mindful of about that 2025 timeframe for your 2022 money, you can't just transfer it to your buddy down the road for them to transfer it back to you. This is individual airport allocations. BIL funds are all reimbursable back to November 15th of 2021. That is the date of enactment of the legislation. So any costs incurred after November 15th, 2021 that are eligible for reimbursement. So that's a good thing when we're starting to work forward for projects. This is an interesting one. BIL funds do not compete against an airport also requesting priority ranking projects. So if you have a large discretionary project that we've been working on with you for a long time, your runway needs to be reconstructed, your BIL funds do not compete against that. We will not make you use your BIL funds for your runway project. They are separate and apart. The BIL funds are intended to be used for lower priority projects, lower priority infrastructure projects that the discretionary and the state apportionment money just can't fund. So that was the intention of the enactment, which is why BIL funds can be used for sponsor-owned revenue producing support facilities at all airports. Now, I'll say this about that. The eligibility still applies. So fuel farms are always very minimally eligible. You have to have supplemental tanks or an increase in capacity. It's not for maintenance. It's not for just little components of your fuel farm. But hangars, for the first time ever in my 21 years, are eligible at all airports. So primary airports can build hangars utilizing their BIL funds. That's a big deal because there is no other funding mechanism for them from a federal perspective. So some takeaways from the bipartisan infrastructure law, just for the allocated portion of it. I strongly recommend looking at the FAQs. They are lengthy, they are comprehensive, and they really go to helping answer all of your questions. If you still read them and you still have questions, of course, you can always reach out to us. We will be happy to answer your questions. Please make sure that you update your 5-year CIP, incorporating your bill funds, using what your projected allocated funds are, and when you look to be spending that money. All projects that are AIP are also AIG eligible. That's included in the website and in the frequently asked questions. Unfortunately, for all of us, the BIL AIG grants and all BIL funds have to have a separate grant application and a separate grant agreement and grant documentation. That is because it is general fund money, not out of the trust fund like AIP. So we cannot mix funding types together in one grant agreement or grant application, which is why they have to be separate. AIG grants follow the same AIP cost share, so 90-10, or in some places 95-5. And the notice for the ATP, which I'll be talking about next, is supposed to be coming out soon. It was supposed to be out September 7th. Then I heard September 16th. Then I heard yesterday. And so the calendar keeps turning. It should be available soon. And soon is a relative term. I think it has to be out by the 30th, but we'll see how that gets published in the Federal Register notice. As soon as it gets out, you will be bombarded with the information. I will blast it out as I have other information. So you will not be without the notice that it is available. So switching gears to the airport terminal and tower competitive program. This is the $5 billion or $1 billion annually over 5 years. Eligible projects include airport terminals, associated roadways, multimodal terminal projects, on airport rail access, and airport sponsor owned towers. The FY22 NOFO period closed in April of this year, and then we announced in July of this year. So you can see a lot happened during that time frame because we received 658 total applications for $14 billion. That was an incredible amount of work and an incredible amount of good work by you guys, recognizing that there's tons of need out there. As you can see, the amount of airports that were submitted drastically is the non-hub and GA airports. So 650 applications for 532 individual airports, representing $14 billion of only $1 billion that was available. So even if we took all of the money that we had available, we wouldn't have been able to even fund one of those categories. So how were the projects selected? This is an incredibly important slide if you intend to apply in the future. I strongly recommend copying this slide. Take your phone out, take a screenshot. The top bullets improve airfield safety through terminal relocation, replace aging facilities, increase capacity and passenger access, encourage competition, improve energy efficiency through LEED credits, or expand access for persons with disabilities, and improving airport access for historically disadvantaged populations. Those are important. Those are selection criteria that we definitely looked at. They are included in the application and something that I think that each airport needs to focus on. Additionally, one of the important things is project readiness, and I'll get into that in a little bit. These applications, all of the written applications went from my office to the regional office. We ranked all of our projects by the region. Then there was a board convened at the headquarters level where applications were looked at and viewed and rated and ranked through then. They went through the Office of Secretary of Transportation, and these actually made it to the White House desk. So all of the projects were reviewed at the highest level of our administration, including the White House, so that there is definitely an opportunity to have some big news for your community when selected. Of the projects, 91 projects at 85 airports were selected, and we spent almost every red cent out of the $970 million available. You go, why isn't it $1 billion? Well, there's some administrative costs that come out of that for administering the grant program. So we spent almost all of the money, which is why the allocated amounts are the allocated amounts. We received 4 airports in Minnesota: MSP, Bemidji, Preston Fillmore County, and Glencoe, Mott in North Dakota, and Chamberlain, South Dakota. So we really were very fortunate to have 6 of those 85 airports selected. It was really pretty impressive. I see somebody just popped in the chat. Catherine, can you read the chat, please? Okay, well, I'll move on, but there is a question in the chat. Catherine, I don't know if you can read that chat or if you want me to read it. Can the funds be used for improvements such as floor coatings to increase the life of concrete, light reflectivity, beautification for employee morale? That's a good question. You'd have to look at how that contributes to the overall airspace and the overall priority things that I talked about in the past slide. Let me go back 1 or 2. Really, they're looking at these larger scale projects for overall. That seems more of a maintenance opportunity for an air traffic control tower or for a terminal. Not to say that it wouldn't necessarily compete, but I don't know that it would compete very high. So then part of the other project was the airport terminal and tower program for overview for the actual federal contract towers. For selection criteria, we received 56 applications for this. Impact on the national airspace system, age of facility, operational constraints, and non-standard facility conditions. Anoka, Minnesota tower was selected for this funding to do some equipment upgrade for a very minor grant. I believe it's under $100,000. So another priority was given to construction projects ready to take a grant by December 31st of 2022. I will tell you, we are working feverishly for the grants that were selected to put them all under grant by that December 31st, 2022. So airports right now are working on finalizing designs and putting forth bids so that we can actually award grants in December. The calendar that I've heard for FY 2023 is that the timeframe will be short as well. So I think I have a slide on that. Yeah, for 2023. Lessons learned from this. Make sure that you have a timely submission prior to the deadline. Make sure that you have eligible and justified projects with a good financial plan. If for some reason you're not selected, the financial plan is something that is important to, if you're requesting a design only grant, that make sure that you actually have a way to fund it. It's not just we wish we could have this money, knowing that there are definitely some concerns and some needs out there. Considerations: make sure that you have clear, concise narrative of how the project meets the objective, those objectives that I put on the slides previously. And then the form is in a PDF reader. Make sure that you open it in order to add a signature that way. This is the form that was used last year. It is the form that will continue to be utilized. I think we expanded some boxes so that it wasn't just 300 characters or 75 characters, but for the most part, the form is the same form as last year. So the next steps for FY 2023 is expected to be released by September 30th. It's expected to be released sooner, but we hadn't gotten there yet. The application period will be open for 30+ days, and the project must be under grant by July 2023. That hasn't been published yet, so this is kind of a flash in the pan sneak peek, but from all the things I've heard is that they're looking to obligate grants that are selected for next year's ATP to be under grant, so out for bid, bids received, signed under grant by July of 2023. So if you're looking to apply and you say there's no way on God's green earth I can have my project under grant by 2023, wait. Do it, put all your eggs in the basket for 2024, because then you have 24, 25, and 26 to apply. Please reapply if you don't get selected, but recognize that the 2022 projects do not carry over, nor will they in the future. So if you apply in 23 and you don't get selected, they will not carry over into 24. You will need to reapply. Now, because you've done the application, it shouldn't be that much of a workload, but you will need to reapply to be selected in the future. I am going. Okay. Now switching gears to the program guidance letter that came out in July. Program guidance letters are kind of supplemental guidance that headquarters releases to help us implement our program, as stated, definition. But this one was released. It is published on our website. It is called the Grant Proration Alternative, which I think is funny because it's not really an alternative. It's just a different solution. Why is this important? So in the past, the background, our AIP handbook, Order 5138D, Change 1, talks about that all AIP grants that are given must result in a complete project, aka usable unit of work. You've heard all of us, all my program managers, myself say, hey, that project won't fund a whole building. That project won't fund a whole project. We need to have a usable unit of work. So why is this important? That's what it says in the AIP handbook. This is where grants that will not result in a usable unit of work, there is some opportunity for that. But the best thing is that the program guidance letter expands the eligibility for a phased approach. Why is this important? Because sometimes defining a phased approach can be challenging. Now, in pavement projects, it's not as challenging. You can say, I'm going to do 1,000 linear feet of this, or for an apron, I'm going to do this many square yards, so on and so forth. It's easier. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's easier to break it into component parts. It's easier to break it into usable units of work. However, examples that I gave, buildings, planning, design, and equipment are not easily broken into component parts. You can't say, well, I'm going to buy 2 wheels of an SRE vehicle, right? Because I only have that much money to cover it. Or I'm only, in my example for the bipartisan stuff, I'm only going to do the roof with this dollar amount. Sometimes planning can exceed the primary entitlements available, as well as design. So that's why this program guidance letter is really a new and wonderful tool in our toolbox. So what does it do? It provides a proration alternative for obtaining usable units of work. So don't think about the word companion in the way that the state of Minnesota, MnDOT, uses companion grants. The work is a companion funding grant for federal dollars, or it's a phased grant. And I'll get into the two different options for that. So that's the total project cost prorated against multiple federal grants. This does not take into account your local share. This does not take into account your state share. This is how you patchwork quilt your federal dollars within your CIP in order to make things happen. So it's for multiple federal grants. So what does it mean? So for option one, companion funded federal grants are two or more grants from one or more federal funding sources in the same fiscal year. So if you're doing a larger scale project and you want to use AIP and BIL allocated money in the same fiscal year to accomplish that, you have now just done a companion funded federal grant. It can be used to complete the project phases over multiple fiscal years, and the usable unit of work is described by this grant funds this portion and this grant funds this portion, and they're in the same fiscal year, just utilizing the two or more different pots of money. The second option is a phased proration for funded federal grants over multiple fiscal years. So this is a funding source that they can differ from year to year. Let's say you saved up your non-primary entitlements to do a portion of the project, and now next year you want to use your BIL money to do the next portion of the project. You are able to do that. They're not considered companion funded grants because there are not two or more grants in the same fiscal year. So they're different. The two different tracks are companion funded federal grants are in the same fiscal year, just different pots of money. Phased proration funded federal grants are single grants over multiple fiscal years. Okay. So those are the two differences. So of course, unfortunately, as I mentioned before, separate grant applications and grant documentation are required for each funding type because AIP comes out of the Aviation and Airways Trust Fund. That is one budgetary line item for our appropriation. And then the following BIL projects are all funded out of different allocated codes. And then supplemental discretionary is also funded out of general fund, but not the same general fund as the bipartisan infrastructure law. So if you did a multi-phased or multifaceted grant program for a project, and you had all of these in your scenario, you could have up to 5 grants and up to 5 applications for each grant to accomplish that project. The program guidance letter is 22 pages. So obviously I'm not going to spend all the time talking about all 22 pages because I do want to wrap up and leave some time for questions. So there are other items to consider in that program guidance letter. How the payments are submitted. They have to be submitted at the same time for both, whether you have a companion grant or a phased grant. The period of performance is still 4 years. So be mindful if you're utilizing this that you have to complete the project within the assigned period of performance. The grant documentation, which I talked about, making sure that you have separate grant applications for each and grant documentation for each grant. Amendments are different and closeouts are different because you'll have different funding streams. We will have to work really diligently to work through how we do amendments and closeouts if you choose to utilize the program guidance letter proration. So what's the moral of our money story? We have lots. We have lots of money and lots of different ways to spend it. It's they all are different. They all have little nuances and little tweaks that we need to make sure that we're all following the same rules, making sure that we're best capitalizing on the federal funding available and making sure that we have we've worked together to not lose any money, not have any money expire. So how can we best do this? That comes with a partnership with the ADO. With my office, we have a fantastic team. We're still rounding out some program managers. We're looking for some engineers to fill in some gaps while people are looking to retire or move on to a different opportunity. So how do you partnership with us? Schedule a CIP meeting, schedule monthly meetings. If you have a large scale project that really we need to roll up our sleeves on, let's get on our calendars, schedule a monthly meeting. If we only talk for 15 minutes of the hour that we have scheduled, we've accomplished 15 minutes of making sure that we're all still on the same page. Invite us to your airport. We are traveling. We're doing our best to try and schedule CIPs at physical locations if we can, if available. So I haven't been out to as many airports as I would like in the last few years, obviously because of COVID, but that, have car will travel. We have 2 pilots on staff now, program managers and a planner, and they're actively trying to convince me to rent an airplane so that we can fly out to the airports, which would be super fun. Always reach out with questions, email, text, phone. Please feel free to reach out to me or your program managers or your planners or our environmental specialists. We don't know what we don't know, and please don't ever feel like you're asking a silly question, because I guarantee if you have that question, so does 5 other people. We started partnering and planning scheduled quarterly calls with each of the consultants to better serve the airports so that they can ask questions and help get a broader perspective of all of the questions that are out there. Okay, I see somebody in the chat. Let's see here. Why don't you fly on the MnDOT plane? That's a very good question. We have to get special permission from our regional administrator to travel with MnDOT. And it is, I'll say the paperwork is daunting. I have been on the MnDOT plane before. It is not something that we are often encouraged to do, unfortunately. I know it's much more time positive to fly than it is to drive, but unfortunately we're not able to always participate that way. So last few slides talk about FY 2023. So I sent out an email that requested your pre-applications for your 2023 projects by October 21st, 2022. Within that email, there is the grant checklist, which is in our standard operating procedure number 6. There is a link to that. Please provide a project justification and narrative, a project sketch showing all work items and disturbance limits. Make sure that your information is consistent between your description and your sketch. A cost estimate obviously is very important. List the project components separately. If you're doing a runway rehab and you have some stub taxiways or some things that you're shifting or reconstructing, please include those as separate line items so that we can see what all of the project components are. If you are not pursuing an FY 2023 grant, say that as well. Just send an email to your program manager and say, hey, I'm going to carry over my FY 23 funds. See you in 2024. Great. Or I intend to transfer my FY 2023 funds and any other funding I have available to X, Y, and Z airport. Stay tuned for the transfer agreement. The sooner you can let us know what you intend to do with your non-primary or primary entitlements, the better, so that we can start rolling the process and moving projects forward. Within that email as well, by March 1st, and this is a new thing. This is kind of a new threshold. I'll tell you, if you remember way back on slide number 3, we issued 364 grants this year. Just our office, just my 20 people. That's an exorbitant workload. Now, yes, most of them were ARPA grants, 209 of them, but 155 grants all needed to be reviewed and programmed and have be on the airport layout plan, airspace, environmental, and all of the things that are here listed on this screen. It is incredibly important for us to work together better. By March 1st, if we don't know or we don't have these things, these questions answered, or this documentation into our office, it's gonna be really hard for us to issue you a 2023 grant. We might not have money. We might still be under a CR, but all of the projects need to be better prepared in the beginning in order for all of us to be successful. Unfortunately, we worked our fingers to the bone, and I just got the last grant signed in my inbox right before we started. We can't keep doing that. September needs to be like, oh, we're just cleaning up stuff and we're going to be out doing CIP meetings, and we're not shoehorning CIP meetings in with still signing grants. So we're going to work better, smarter, and really work towards having things ready to go closer to that March timeframe than ever before. And I know that's not going to be easy for some. I know that's not going to be popular. Dave, my assistant manager, Dave Anderson, in our North and South Dakota office, him and I are going to be meeting in early November to draft a letter. When we receive your pre-application, you're going to get a letter back from us that says, looks great, or here are the things that we need to have worked on. And those things need to be worked on before March 1st. And if not, that's okay. There's no shame in moving your project to 2024. It just means maybe it's not ready. Maybe it's not ripe, and that's okay too. Or, hey, you've done a wonderful job of getting all this stuff put forth and put together before March 1st. We're ready. We're ready to program your grant. We're going to push it forward, and as soon as Congress gives us a full appropriation, we're going to slap that money on there and we're going to be off to the races. So let's just do better for all of us. I know every single one of the people on this call that I recognize your names. I know how hard you've all been working. I know how hard my team has been working. And so let's just make 2023 a little bit of a deep breath, a little bit of a, wow, we accomplished so much through the COVID years. And now we're just going to kind of get back to normal. Whatever that normal looks like, I'm not going to say the words new normal because it's not a new normal. We're changing gears and we're going to do it together. And part of it doing together is making sure that we can have our projects ready to go. And so we're not chasing after each other to try and get things done. The last slide is me. Those are my contact information. My office phone rings to my mobile phone. So if you call my office, you're going to get me on my cell phone anyway. That is my mobile phone. You are welcome to call or text me. Feel free. It is a government cell phone. So after probably 6 o'clock at night, I may not answer it. I may be having dinner with my family. But I do also get email on my phone. It's right there. Feel free to reach out to me or any one of my staff. They are always ready and able to help you. And I hope that this was beneficial. I made it under in 2 minutes. I got 2 minutes to spare. I tried really hard to go fast, Catherine. I'm sorry.
No,
I didn't
you
give
did.
more time.
No, that was wonderful. So much valuable information, Lindsey. Thank you so much. Before we go, does anyone have questions? I know sometimes you have to process things before you can able to ask questions, but. Okay, well, as Lindsey pointed out, you know how to reach them. So feel free to reach out to them at any point through your journey with the grants. So again, thank you so much for coming to this AirTAP webinar. Thank you, Lindsey and the FAA, for putting this on for us today. And I hope to see everyone on October 20th, where we learn more about understanding the consultant process. So everyone, I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Catherine. Thank you, everybody.
Lindsey.